Today I'm going to be replacing the top end on a Stihl MS 661 chainsaw. The customer put straight gas through the saw and it scored the piston and cylinder wall, so I've got the parts in today and I'm going to show you guys how I replace that top end. Here's a piston and cylinder kit. It does not come with a gasket or needle cage, so I go ahead and order those as well. Sometimes you can reuse the gasket, but for a few bucks, I just go ahead and replace it since I'm tearing everything apart. Here's a look at the gasket part number if you need that, right at the top there. And then also the needle cage, which is going to go on top of the crank. Let's cut the box open here. I'll show you guys what we got in this kit. And we got the piston and cylinder in here. And then you got a little goodie bag there with some miscellaneous parts that we are going to need to do the top end. First thing I'm going to do is remove the bar and chain, make it easier to reposition the saw when I'm doing some repairs. And then we'll start with the shroud cover, the air filter cover, expose everything, and then start dissecting it from there. Loosen this screw to remove the shroud cover. I'm going to go ahead and remove the spark plug, make it easier to take this top shroud off. Next, remove the air filter housing. That way you'll be able to access the two nuts that you need to take off to remove this air filter cover. Now I'm going to disconnect the throttle linkage on the carburetor. I'm going to disconnect the fuel line. I'm also going to take the wires that are connected right here and take those off so that way I can pull the carburetor all the way out. I have to pull the carburetor out for two reasons. The first reason is I'm going to disassemble it and clean it while it's out. The second reason is it's mounted against the manifold and I need to be able to pull the manifold out while I'm taking the cylinder off. Before I disconnect the fuel line from the carburetor, I am going to remove all the fuel so that way it does not come out the fuel line and make a mess. Now I'm going to remove the back half of the muffler. There are two screws that hold this onto the cylinder wall. Next, I'm going to disconnect the AV spring that's mounted to the cylinder and the handle. Right here, I'm loosening the screw that holds on the clamp that holds the manifold together. I like to loosen this before I start moving it around and prying on it, so that way it doesn't tear by accident. Out comes the carburetor so I can access the manifold to push it through this plastic molding, so that way I can extract it when I'm pulling out the cylinder. Next, I'm going to remove this metal ring and also the washer so that way I can push the manifold through. I have this rounded end tool, so I'm going to use this to push the manifold through. Do not use a pointed screwdriver, otherwise you can puncture a hole in the manifold. Now that everything's disconnected, I can remove the 4 bolts that hold on the cylinder. Once the bolts are all removed, go ahead and lightly pull on the cylinder and lift it up off the piston. Here's a look at the scored piston. It is completely smoked, so that's why we're replacing it. And here's a look at the inside of the cylinder wall. There is significant scoring, and you can catch it with your fingers, so it's not something that can be lightly sanded off. Now I'm going to pry the old circlip off so I can remove the piston. Once I remove the circlip, I'm going to flip the saw over and I'm going to pound out the wrist pin from the other side. Here's another look at the piston after I got it removed. You can see that it's completely scored and the rings are stuck. So this is completely junk and we will get the new cylinder and piston installed and bring the saw back to life. Since I got the saw torn apart, I am going to replace the needle cage. I just put a little bit of lubrication on there before I stick it back into the crank. Don't forget to install the gasket before you install the new piston. You will need to remove the manifold as well as the decomp valve from the old cylinder before you install the new cylinder on the saw. I've got this really neat Circlip tool. You put the circlip on this magnet right here, and then you press it into the cap. And then once it's in the cap, you can put the cap tight against the piston and then push it the rest of the way through, and it'll snap right into place, and you won't have the circlip flying around getting lost. Stihl makes 3 different ones of these. They're going to be a 10mm, 11, and a 12. This particular one is a 12 for this saw. They are really handy to have around the shop if you're doing a lot of this work. So here's the part number of this tool. This is the 12, like I said. Go ahead and write the part number down. A Stihl dealer should be able to order it for you. Notice the arrow on the piston. Arrow is always pointing towards the exhaust. Also notice this handle. I'm going to put the circlip on the side closest to the handle. When the piston is mounted to the crank, that side is going to be hard to access. That's why I do this side first. All I do is mount the tool tight against the piston, and then I push the circlip in. Sure beats fighting with the needle nose pliers. Next, I'm going to lubricate the wrist pin with some press fluid. This is going to reduce friction and make it easier to slide into place. Laying the saw on the side is the easiest way to get the wrist pin in place because you can see what you're doing a lot easier. I've got the second circlip loaded in. Now I'm going to press it into place. Here's the second circlip installed. I always go back and double check to make sure it's firmly in place because the last thing you want to happen is have that come out during the operation. Now install the manifold and the clamp on your new cylinder. Your parts package will have a shroud cover mount, so go ahead and install that on the cylinder as well. Install the decont valve in your new cylinder. Use press fluid to lubricate the top of the piston. I also have a wooden block in place to hold the piston up so I can install the cylinder. Your piston has 2 rings and each ring has a gap. Notice where this gap goes. There's a little pin right there. Make sure that you're lining the piston rings up with that gap on both sides. If you do not line the ring gap up with that pin and you go ahead and compress the ring, you can break the rings. So make sure that they're lined up. Now install the ring compression tool on there to compress the rings down so you can install the cylinder on top. Lightly press down on the cylinder while we're leaving a little bit of pressure on the red ring clamp, and then keep wiggling it back and forth until it clears the rings. You will feel the cylinder slide past the rings. If you feel it getting caught up, go ahead and pull the cylinder back off and make sure that your rings are compressed so you don't break them. Remove your block, remove your ring clamp, and go ahead and press the cylinder down the rest of the way. Now you can install your manifold back into place and start reattaching all the other hardware. Before you tighten down the bolts, make sure that your gasket's in place. I lightly tighten them down. They're not all the way. Once I get all 4 of them started, I'll go back through and I'll retighten everything down and get it to specs as far as the torque goes. Once the cylinder is secure, go ahead and reinstall the muffler. brought that saw back to life. It's ready to go, cutting wood again for the homeowner, and another project completed. So as you can see, pretty straightforward project. This one's nice because I didn't have to take a lot of extra parts off. I did take the carburetor apart while I had the saw in here, cleaned all the debris out of the carburetor. That's something that I always do on chainsaws because believe it or not, most people don't clean their air filters out on a regular basis, and there's a lot of pass-through inside the carburetors. It takes about half an hour to actually do the work on this saw, probably another half an hour worth of cleaning to make sure that everything's clean before I put everything back together. So about a total hour wrapped up in this project. So again, here's a look at the piston that I took out. Completely scored up, straight fuel issue, not salvageable. And then the top end on the cylinder walls were scored up equally as bad as this guy. Nothing to clean up, nothing to save there. So it got a whole new Stihl OEM top end. And I hope you guys that were asking about the Circlip Tool got that part number off of it. There's actually 3 different sizes. You got a 10, 11, and 12. This particular one took a 12. And then I showed you the part number that was actually on the side of the tool. So make sure you guys grab one if you don't have one already. It just makes this project so much easier to do, so efficient, and then you don't lose those circlips. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you guys did like the video, make sure you guys like down below and subscribe to my channel. Check out all my other great content on there. I've got repairs that come through the shop on a daily basis, all the equipment that I work on, and some fun videos along the way. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you guys subscribing to my channel.